you have this amazing cash to DeFi experience that's completely native. And a lot of times the users don't even know that they're using crypto behind the scenes. So from their perspective, it's more of like a neobankish experience.
Tomer Weller is Chief Product Officer at Stellar. It is a blockchain quietly powering real-world finance globally and enabling seamless crypto to cash flows with MoneyGram.
I feel like it's very easy to get sucked into the hype.
Yeah.
How does SDF kind of not get sucked in? And you're saying like, okay, even if we could probably chase this narrative and do well, we're going to stay focused on what our mission is.
These issuers are becoming more and more comfortable with DeFi protocols, and we're seeing more DeFi protocols that are friendly for these assets. So I think these crossovers are in building in this intersection is keep your eyes on the ball, talk to your users, and don't get distracted too easily.
Today's guest is Tomer Weller, the Chief Product Officer at the Stellar Development Foundation. Stellar is a blockchain network that aims to create real-world use cases through sectors like cross-border payments, tokenizing real assets, and more. If you recognize Stellar, it's been around for, I believe, over 10 years, and we also had the CEO, Donnell Dixon, on back in May of 2024. So it's nice to bring on someone else from Stellar. Tomer, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, 11 years going strong.
11 years. Yeah. Okay. When Donnell came on, it was about 10. Okay. That's where this comes from. To start off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this space?
Sure. So I'm Tomer. I lead the product at the foundation. And I've been with the foundation for a while, for 8 years now. I joined in 2017 following some connections from MIT, where I did my grad school research. And I know some Bitcoin core developers who were working with Jed at the time. I went to San Francisco, met with Jed. To be honest, didn't know much about blockchain in general. Kind of thought that Bitcoin was a scam at the time.
You changed your mind?
I did. Yes, I did change my mind. But yeah, I really loved. I met Jed. I met David Mazieres, who's the Stanford professor who actually came up with the consensus protocol. Was super impressed both with the technical capabilities of the people in the foundation, but also just the mission. And so packed up my bags from Boston and moved to San Francisco the following week. Mm-hmm. And yeah, almost 8 years now.
8 years in, how do you think Stellar has kind of evolved over time?
It's a good question. So Stellar has always been super mission focused. SDF has like a big mission of creating equitable access for the world's to the world's financial system. And I think that having this lighthouse has really been beneficial throughout the years of the boom bust cycles, all the hype. And so, I would say from a technical perspective, a lot has changed throughout the years. I would say that we've definitely expanded our areas of focus, but at the core, it's still the same mission, and it has definitely helped us in decision making throughout the years.
Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of times people do chase narratives in this industry.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like suddenly, insert blockchain name is now like an AI chain, or they're focusing on that, or gaming, or meme coins, or whatever it may be. And I feel like it's very easy to get sucked into the hype. How does SDF kind of not get sucked in? And you're saying like, okay, even if we could probably chase this narrative and do well, we're going to stay focused on what our mission is.
Yeah. So I think there are two angles to this. First of all, there is kind of like the technical angle of like what actually makes sense for a trust minimized system like a blockchain. And, we've seen, you've said it, medical records on the blockchain, supply chain on the blockchain was a big narrative for a few years. Gaming was like a really big thing. A lot of blockchains started with this idea of gaming, even in recent years. And you see pretty much all of them have shifted away back to financial instruments, because this is where we really see the benefit of trust minimized innovation. And I think from a mission perspective and just kind of like business alignment, having a clear mission and knowing what we're trying to achieve and evaluating who we partner with and what technical, what features we pursue has been really beneficial throughout the years.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say are like the biggest themes and sectors that you are honing in on?
I would say that, Stellar started out really from the cross-border payments perspective, and it's still a lot of the work that we do. And throughout the years, we've kind of taken that infrastructure and built or we're allowing builders to build more financial instruments on top of that. So one of the core pieces of infrastructure we have at Stellar is this thing we call the Anchor Network, which is a global network of on and off ramps that allow you to move in and out of crypto through local rails. So for example, through SEPA in Europe, through PIX in Brazil, or probably the biggest anchor that we have, MoneyGram, allows you to move from cash to USDC in your wallet in their entire network, which is more than 400,000 agents around the world. And so we can take this infrastructure and not only enable payments on top of it, but enable things that resemble more like savings products or investment products. And so you can actually go through some Stellar wallets. For example, Meru is a wallet that's growing a lot in Chile right now, and they offer users an ability both to deposit funds through MoneyGram, but also to invest, to put the USDC in a yield-bearing instrument. Specifically, it's the Blend protocol on Stellar. So you have this amazing cash to DeFi experience that's completely native. It is very frictionless. And a lot of times the users don't even know that they're using crypto behind the scenes. So from their perspective, it's more of a neobankish experience.
For the MoneyGram partnership, it's coming up on a 3-year anniversary, right? And I believe it's been about $30 million in cash to crypto transactions globally. I did my homework. I think what's interesting to me about that is what you just said, how people don't even know that it is crypto, right? So can you walk us through how that kind of works from a product perspective? And let's say I'm a new person, I'm about to use this. How does that work?
Sure. So it really depends on the actual wallet used as an interface. Let's take, for example, the Decaf wallet, which is a wallet built by expats in Latin America, mostly active there, also in some places in Africa. And so from your perspective, when you open a Decaf account, you have no idea that this is actually a crypto account. In practice, it's actually both a Stellar and a Solana account. And when you want to top it up with cash, they basically will send you to a MoneyGram agent. You initiate a transaction from within the wallet. You get this transaction ID. You show this to the agent, and then you complete the transaction in person by showing the ID and actually giving the cash. And so from the user's perspective, they can now use that to pay the bills. They can now use that. They're actually launching an actual debit card soon, so you can use it like that. But all along, you don't actually have to know that this is crypto. Even when you invested in a yield-bearing instrument, it is basically, the experience is kind of like a savings account or a high-yield savings account. You don't need to think about the fact that there's DeFi behind the scenes, that there are transactions, approval transactions, all the rigmarole of DeFi.
Yeah. What you're describing right now sounds like a good user experience.
Yes.
Where you don't need to know what you're doing in order to use the product, right?
Yeah.
When you think about creating good products in Web3, what are some elements it needs to have, maybe in addition to what you just discussed?
This weird thing in the Web3 space, which is people try to reinvent what having a successful product is. But in practice, we've known from decades of Web2 experience, we know what a successful product experience is. We know what product market fit looks like. I think a lot of times what we see in Web3 is people, and you can't hold against them. Sometimes it's founders that come straight from college. They've never actually built anything in Web2. They move straight to Web3, and so they're not necessarily measuring the right things. It's very hard to measure in general in Web3, and I think a lot of times people just look under the streetlight for signal instead of actual more substantial usage metrics. And so at the end of the day, what I tell founders is talk to your users, understand if you're actually providing value, and everything else will fall into place. Obviously, having great user experience is important. Security is important. Scale is important. All these things that people in Web3 are really focused on, these are important things. But first and foremost, you really need to bring value into a person's life.
Right. And when you're thinking about these Web2 experiences, I've never worked in the Web2 consumer side of things. What made those things so good compared to maybe Web3 ones?
Yeah, so I think obviously there's the user experience side of things, which is
It's easy. Right?
Yeah, I think self custody is still something that people struggle with, and I think that we've made a lot of progress as an industry. I think there's a lot of seedless solutions out there right now. Stellar was the first network to natively incorporate passkeys as a solution for signing transactions, which I think is great. I think there's still a lot of value to explore there in terms of what does a progressive authorization looks like. We want to make sure in crypto you want to balance between making sure that your funds don't get lost and that your funds are not stolen. And these two things are not always, they're kind of like pulling in different directions, right? But I would say that at the end of the day, it's still really about creating value for a person. And so if you are providing some sort of banking-like experience that is inferior to what a person already has in the traditional finance system, then maybe you'll attract some diehard decentralization advocates, but you're not going to sweep. You're not going to grow the pie, right? You're just going to play around with Web3 users that are just like shifting from one wallet to another. But this ecosystem is not going to grow by moving Web3 users from one wallet to another.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. Are there any specific types of characteristics or elements that you would say creates a bad Web3 product where you're like, I can't believe they did this, or why does this keep happening?
Obviously, friction and pretty much like not explaining things. So whenever you go into a wallet and you need to you want to swap an asset, but first you need to approve it, for example, right? I think that's kind of like a big thing for normies. Luckily, I think the Ethereum ecosystem is finally moving away from that. Stellar has an account abstraction model that really, from the get-go, we've kind of like fixed that. I think the blind signing is also like a really terrible thing in which basically your wallet is giving you this hash that you need to sign, maybe with your Ledger wallet, maybe with a different wallet. And that is like a really terrible experience. And so I think really creating clarity in every step of the way is really important. Obviously, there's also kind of like risk management and explaining to the users, when they are taking risk, like what type of risk they're taking. When you go to your Schwab account and you invest in something, you get like very clear guidelines for the risk profile. And I think this is really important in Web3 as well.
Yeah, when you talk about risk, it makes me think about security. And I feel like I just had a guest on recently who, we were talking about a hack and everything. And it's like a lot of times I feel like people think about security after hacks opposed to before. And I think the role that security should play in this ecosystem is often downplayed. I'm curious what your take is on it. Like, what role does and should security play on this front when it comes to building products, deploying products, and putting it out there in this like Web3 ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think there was actually a really interesting hack last week in the Sui ecosystem where Satos got hacked. And I think that's a really interesting for discussion because of two things. A, because of the hack itself, the mechanics of it, but also because of how the governance aspect of how validators kind of responded. And so I think from and just to reiterate, last week there was a hack, Satos, which is an AMM in the Sui ecosystem, was drained from with I think $220 million, $60 million of it were immediately transferred to other networks through bridges, and $160 million were effectively frozen by validators. The actual hack, very classic DeFi issue, which is an Oracle contract had a bug. And once you exploit an Oracle, you can basically fool an AMM into not misquoting prices and basically drain it. Very classic. I think that security, there's no silver bullets in security. And so I think that you really need to build a secure stack and an ecosystem. And so we actually launched our new smart contracts platform last year. We've put a lot of emphasis on security, which both includes, having a secure runtime from the ground up. So both Soroban, which is our smart contracts platform based on WebAssembly and Rust kind of like doesn't give you too much rope to hang yourself with. For example, EVM gives you a lot of rope to hang yourself with.
That's dark.
Well,
yes,
it's
it
true.
is. Go on.
And so I think, these are kind of like, the newer generation of runtimes really kind of like help protect you more, whether it's on Stellar or, the movie ecosystem, for example. I think there's another layer of kind of like giving you the best testing capabilities out there. In the EVM space, actually, Foundry is a really good tool that we've learned a lot from. And so Stellar, we have some of the Rust core developers who have actually built some of our testing infrastructure, fuzzing and such. Formal verification is this other layer that's like super important. We brought Certora in, which is a huge name in DeFi security. And then at the end of the day, it's really all about getting expert eyes on it. And so we've set up what we call the audit bank, which is it's basically we're connecting auditors with protocols for sponsored audit. So basically, if you've graduated from the Stellar Community Fund and you meet a set of criteria, then we will hook you up with an auditor. We have 6 auditors. We've audited more than 40 projects like this, a bunch more in progress, put more than $3 million just into the audit bank. And so we're taking this stuff really seriously. And I think that like this specific hack last week and also some other ones last year really demonstrated how even if you have like a really great smart contracts runtime, like Move, for example, then you can still get hacked. At the end of the day, like the runtime itself does not guarantee anything. And so, do all of these things, get audited, have good testing. I think the other aspect, which we saw last week, is really interesting, which is the governance aspect. Because I think this is the actual first time that we saw a set of validators basically commit to not proposing blocks that move the funds away from these addresses of the hackers. And so I think there's a lot of discussions on like whether this means like a network is too centralized. I actually think that's a bit of a red herring. That's not the really interesting discussion, which is like validators in these networks have a lot of power, right? And so oftentimes we brush this off as, this is a trustless network. Validators don't actually decide on anything. But in practice, like a validator can actually like do something like this without any protocol upgrade. And so this begs the question of like, who are these validators? What are, what motivates them?
Right.
And I think that if you look at most of the blockchains out there right now, there's a lot of emphasis on proof of work, proof of stake, which is really built on anonymous validators that get a vote based on their compute in proof of work or based on stake and proof of stake, like amount of money that they have. And so I think that as institutions and as we see more, bigger institutions come on, I think they're really interested in knowing these validators and understanding their motivation. And so what we're seeing when we're talking with a lot of institutions is that a model that puts reputation front and center, like the Stellar Consensus Protocol, actually is something that makes these institutions a lot more comfortable because they actually know, for example, Franklin Templeton is a validator on the Stellar network. And in the Stellar Consensus Protocol, you basically, as a validator, you can enumerate these are the other entities that I trust. And in a decentralized way, the protocol will basically figure out what we call the quorum intersection and make decisions based on entities in that quorum.
When it comes to validators, you mentioned how it's not always clear to know like what is their motivation, right? Have you ever spoken with a bunch of validators and kind of gotten a feel for what matters to them, or is that really not something that you're focused on the product side?
Yeah, sure. So we work a lot with validators in the Stellar ecosystem, and because SCP is based on reputation, we talk to these validators all the time. Like I said, Franklin Templeton is one of them. We have a bunch of wallets in the Stellar ecosystem, and at the end of the day, because the Stellar protocol doesn't actually award incentives to validators, then the validators that are there are they're basically there because that's part of their value proposition.
Because they want to be there, yeah.
They want to be there. They want to have a say in the governance of the network. So for example, if you are a DeFi protocol or if you are a wallet and you want to say in let's say the limits of the network of configuring kind of like block sizes and stuff like that, then the only way to do that is if you are a validator and you basically have a say in both configuring the network and also which transactions are actually making it to consensus.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned Soroban, which I believe launched last March on the network's mainnet. And it's a smart contracts platform that helps developers build, deploy, and interact with Stellar-based dApps. What has the journey for that been since, let's say, March of last year in 2024 to where we are now at the end of May in 2025?
Yeah, I'd say, first of all, this was super exciting. This is the biggest protocol change we've ever had, and personally, probably the biggest project I've ever worked on. And I would say that retrofitting a smart contract platform into a blockchain that was not designed for that is a huge undertaking. The nice thing is that because we were a latecomer to the smart contract game, we were basically had kind of like a late mover advantage of being able to see what's working and what's not. And so, when I talk shit about EVM, this is because we've had we had an opportunity to take a good hard look at this and some of the other things out there. And I think that what we built is really kind of like state of the art, the best you can do right now.
Why do you talk shit about EVM?
Well,
yeah, right.
I think that the Ethereum virtual machine is amazing in the sense that it was the first thing that introduced kind of like this idea of Turing complete smart contracts. I think that we've seen the entire DeFi ecosystem has evolved from that. So there's a lot of respect where it's due. It is worth mentioning that EVM was kind of like built in haste in 2015. Even back then, there were already calls to swap it out for WebAssembly, which started maturing back then and is a much kind of like more mature virtual machine standard. Because of the challenges of actually introducing new features to a blockchain, it just so happened to be that they kind of got stuck with it. But the awkward thing is because that people put this idea of EVM compatibility on a pedestal, you now have blockchains launching in 2025 that have deficiencies that we've known about since 2015, right? Things like, reentrancy attacks that were like the cause of the DAO hack back in 2016. These are still present in your blockchain. So it's kind of like ridiculous that we're still doing that. I do think that there's been some positive progress in that space, which is that Vitalik himself wrote this post last month advocating for replacing or adding a different type of virtual machine in EVM, RISC-V, based on the RISC-V architecture. And we don't need to get into the technical details, but I do think that this is a great moment in which Vitalik himself kind of like admits, okay, maybe the EVM is not the end game of virtual machines. And it's also nice because, to be honest, us in the non-EVM space have been experienced a lot of gaslighting throughout the years of no, EVM is everything you need. You're just over optimizing. And so it's great to see that in the Ethereum ecosystem. And as soon as Vitalik said that, everyone in the Ethereum ecosystem immediately aligned. And now there's like this understanding that the EVM is not the best thing in the world.
So do you think developers will move away from the EVM then?
When we started developing Soroban 3 years ago, or 3.5 years ago now, there were a lot of arguments, both in the ecosystem and internally at SDF. Like we knew the EVM was not perfect, but there was such a gravitational force around it that we weren't sure. We eventually did decide to go in a non-EVM way. It was very contentious at the time. I think this is like we started seeing inklings of this working out for Solana, for example, pre-FTX, and so back then it was a really hard decision, but today I think it's a much easier decision. I think that at the end of the day, we're seeing that developers are going to ecosystems because of a community, because of a mission, because of an ecosystem, not because of any technology or another. And I do think that Stellar does offer, especially for Rust developers. Rust is every year it's voted as the most beloved programming language, not just for smart contracts in various surveys. So Rust developers love Stellar. I think the Rust developer experience for Stellar specifically is the best out there. Yeah, I invite all developers to check it out for themselves.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what do you think is driving developers to build on Stellar opposed to the plethora of other chains out there?
Yeah, so I think if you look at some of like the bigger institutions out there, I think that Stellar, and specifically the Stellar Development Foundation, and you've had Danelle here on your podcast, I think that Stellar is kind of like the adult in the room, and I think we have the type of relationship with institutions, with the regulators that make these type of institutions more comfortable. We have tech that makes these institutions more comfortable, whether it's the reputation-based trust, like in the consensus protocol, but also through protocol features like opt-in, allow lists, deny lists for asset issuers, clawback ability for asset issuers, all opt-in. I think these are things that are really driving institutions, especially issuers. I would say that on the kind of like developer top of the funnel side of things, then people are just like really excited about the technology because the developer experience is phenomenal. I think the tooling that we have, whether it's the CLI, the SDK, or just the developer tooling in the ecosystem, are really exciting for people. So geeks get excited about developer experience.
Of course they do.
Yeah.
On the use case front of things, where do you see the most opportunity to build new products that could tap into either emerging markets or existing ones?
I think right now, what we're really excited about is how things intersect. Okay, so obviously there's a big push on DeFi in the ecosystem, which is still up and coming. We have RWAs that are a very dominant part of the Stellar ecosystem. We have more than around $500 million worth of tokenized treasuries, mostly on the Franklin Templeton side with Benji, but also Wisdom Tree assets. We're seeing new exciting issuers like Etherfuse, for example, which are coming in with their tokenized bonds, government debt. And so I think that, and we have like the classic stuff, which is the anchors and the payments. And I think where it gets exciting is where these things intersect. So for example, these like, cash to DeFi experiences, but also mixing in RWAs with DeFi. So I think there's a lot of crossover there. I think that a lot of issuers are starting to see the benefits of DeFi. And historically, and this needs to be said, a lot of these RWAs that are out there are not actually playing that well with DeFi. So a lot of these assets are very kind of like closed loop and mostly open for institutions. And what we're seeing is these issuers are becoming more and more comfortable with DeFi protocols. And we're seeing more DeFi protocols that are friendly for these assets. So I think these crossovers are in building in this intersection is the most interesting thing.
What do you think is the time frame for the inverse of that closed loop, where then suddenly it becomes more open and these RWAs are actually accessible across the DeFi ecosystem?
So I think it's progress. It's a process. And what we've seen, for example, when Franklin Templeton first filed with the SEC to issue Benji, back then, it wasn't even supposed to be primary issued on the blockchain. It was supposed to be basically something on their system and then kind of like mirrored on a blockchain. Just not that exciting, to be honest. But with time and as they got more confidence, they actually moved the primary issuance to Stellar. And so what we're seeing right now, but now you still need to access it through the Benji app. What we're seeing with Franklin Templeton, with issues like Wisdom Tree, is that they're now exploring this idea of moving to full self-custody and being able to hold your assets in different wallets. So at first, it will be specific wallets, but hopefully later, completely open loop. And what we're seeing with new issuers like Etherfuse that I mentioned before is that they're actually open loop from the get-go. So Etherfuse specifically operates out of Mexico, and you can permissionlessly through the decentralized exchange on Stellar or any other AMM, you can procure CETES, for example, which is a government debt instrument out of Mexico. Great yield, by the way. Not financial advice.
Not financial advice, yes.
Yeah. And yeah, so I think there's like, we're getting there. It's taken a while, but I think like things are really aligning well right now.
On the institutional side of things, what are other conversations that you're having? What are the products they want built?
That's a really good question. I would say probably the biggest one that we don't have as an industry, we don't have a great answer for right now is privacy. I think that privacy is obviously important from the consumer perspective. We want to protect our users from surveillance and other issues. But I think especially for enterprises, it's really difficult to build like complete blockchain solutions, especially with self-custody, because everything's out there in the open. And the problem with privacy is that between some of the nefarious activities we've seen in the past and the aggressive way that the DOJ pursued some of these, that people were just like afraid to work in that space. We're in a very different world right now. And so I think with this new administration, with the DOJ kind of like backing off of Tornado Cash, I think there is a really great opportunity to start building various privacy solutions. Obviously, things that take compliance into account.
Right.
And I think it's really important for us that anything we support has some story around compliance. We don't think it's going to be a one size fits all. And we still do think that transparency of the base layer is super important. And so the way that privacy will emerge is, a set of privacy constructions on top of public blockchains rather than supersede the blockchain itself.
So is Stellar building on the privacy front right now?
Yes.
Anything you could share?
There are some things that I can share, but I will say that overall, we're working in kind of like three main pillars. One of them is investing heavily in infrastructure. There's a lot of potential infrastructure for privacy. Right now, the big one is zero knowledge cryptography. And so with the latest protocol version from late last year, we introduced some of the crypto required for various advanced zero knowledge constructions. We're adding some more. We're also working with tool builders in the space. So for example, we did a joint RFP with Aztec around building a Noir lang.
What does that mean?
Sure. Noir is a programming language that is used to describe ZK circuits. Circuits is the way that zero knowledge people call applications. Okay. And so that will allow you to build, amongst other things, privacy constructions, but also things like verified credentials and things like ZK rollups. So there's a lot of things you can build with ZK.
Yeah.
So being able to do that with a simple language like Noir, which is developed by the Aztec folks, is a huge, great building block to have. We're working with some of the ZK VM builders in the space on porting their verifiers into the Stellar ecosystem. And we're also collaborating with a few developers and dev shops on building like concrete privacy solutions. And hopefully within the next few weeks or months, we'll be able to talk about this a bit more.
All right. We'll have to talk about it more later. Tomer, what else is something that you're paying attention to that you think others should as well, aside from everything we've discussed?
Yeah, I think right now I'm really focused on the privacy stuff. So that's kind of like top of mind.
Right. Okay. And last thing, can you leave us with a piece of advice, something that you've carried with you throughout your time in this space?
Yeah. I would say keep your eyes on the ball. Talk to your users. And don't get distracted too easily.
Yeah, great advice. Amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you.